January wind screamed through the courthouse eaves, rattling frozen window panes like old bones. Walt Brennan's work boots tracked road salt across marble floors, each step echoing in the empty probate office. The brass compass in his coat pocket clicked faintly against a button, cold metal through damp wool. Outside, dirty snowbanks reflected gray morning light. Ramona Sykes slid a document across her counter, face grave as a funeral. Walt, when did you sign this quitclaim deed? He stared at his own signature. January 3rd, transferring 190 acres to Riverbend Holdings LLC. His mouth went dry as winter air. I didn't. Ramona's hand trembled on the paper. Behind him, the courthouse door opened. Diane's heels clicked closer on marble, her voice bright into a cell phone. She was laughing. Walt's finger traced the forged signature. The loops were wrong, the spacing off. Someone had stolen his name. Ramona quietly slipped the deed into her copy machine. "Oh, I'll keep this safe," she whispered. Diane saw him. Her smile froze. The phone dropped from her hand. The morning Walt discovered the theft, he'd risen at 5 like always. 44 years of the same ritual. Coffee percolating in the kitchen, the smell of it mixing with the faint scent of wood smoke from last night's fire. He dressed in the dark, boots laced tight, his grandfather's compass retrieved from the oak box on the mantel. The land was frozen solid. His breath came out in clouds as he walked the fence line, boots crunching through ice-crusted snow. The compass needle swung true north, brass cold against his palm, even through worn leather gloves. He whispered the old instructions, his grandfather's voice in his head. Sight the needle, walk the line, trust the earth. 380 acres, every boundary marked in his memory like scripture. But near the North 40, he stopped. Fresh tire tracks cut through the snow, deep treads he didn't recognize. Someone had been surveying. Recently, the tracks led to the property line, then turned back toward the county road. Walt stood there a long time, compass in hand, watching the sun break cold and pale over his grandfather's original homestead. The wind carried the smell of diesel exhaust, faint but foreign. Something was wrong, he just didn't know how wrong yet. The courthouse smelled like a century of paperwork, old leather bindings, dust, and the burnt coffee smell of Ramona's ancient percolator. She'd been county clerk for 40 years, knew every deed, every title, every signature in 3 generations of files. Walt, her voice was too quiet, too careful. He'd come in for a routine burn permit renewal, spring prairie restoration, something he'd done every year since 1982. She placed the document between them like it might explode. Riverbend Holdings LLC, he read aloud. The words felt strange in his mouth. What's this? A quitclaim deed, filed 6 weeks ago, transfers half your farm, 190 acres, to this company. Ramona's finger, bent with arthritis, pointed to the signature line. That's your name, Walt. He looked. The signature did look like his, the capital W, the flowing B in Brennan, but the loops were wrong, too tight, the spacing between letters slightly off. January 3rd, Ramona said. You remember signing this? January 3rd. He'd been at the doctor's office. Blood pressure check, annual physical. He had the appointment card in his truck, probably, stuck in the visor with all the others. I didn't sign this, Ramona exhaled slowly. Then someone forged your name, and they filed it with my office. She looked at him with 40 years of bureaucratic integrity in her eyes. That's a crime, Walt. The copy machine hummed. She was already making duplicates, her hand steady despite the tremor. I'll keep these safe, she said, sliding copies into a manila folder. You'll need them. Need them for what? For whatever comes next. The courthouse door banged open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the sharp smell of expensive perfume, citrus and something chemical. Diane's heels clicked across the marble. She was laughing into her phone, blonde hair perfect, real estate blazer pressed and professional. She glanced up, saw Walt standing at Ramona's counter. Her eyes flicked to the document between them. For half a second, something passed across her face. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. Then the smile returned, bright as fresh paint. She ended her call, dropped the phone in her purse. Hey, babe, what are you doing here? Permit renewal, he said. His voice sounded normal, steady. You? Oh, just checking some property records. Work stuff. She kissed his cheek, her lips cold from outside. I'll meet you at home for lunch? Sure. She left the way she came, quick, efficient. The door swung shut behind her, and the courthouse settled back into its old silence. Ramona was watching him. "You okay?" she asked. Walt folded the copy of the quitclaim deed, slid it into his coat pocket next to the compass. Both objects felt heavy. One pointed true, the other pointed towards something he didn't want to see. "Yeah," he said, "I'm okay." But driving home, his hands shook on the wheel. That night at dinner, he watched Diane move around the kitchen. She hummed while she cooked, some pop song he didn't know. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, smiled, kept stirring pasta sauce. He waited until they were seated, until she'd poured wine, until the moment felt normal enough that his question wouldn't shatter it. "You know anything about Riverbend Holdings, LLC? She looked up, blinked twice. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. Then she smiled. Easy, unbothered. "Never heard of it. Why?" He cut his chicken, chewed slowly, swallowed the lie along with the meat. "No reason," he said. "Just something I saw today." She went back to eating, already scrolling her phone with her free hand. But Walt noticed. She'd blinked twice before answering. People who tell the truth don't blink twice. The fire marshal showed up unannounced on a Thursday morning. Walt was in the equipment barn changing oil in the tractor. When he heard the truck pull up, official county plates, amber lights on the roof, Marshal Hendricks stepped out with a clipboard. Young guy, maybe 40, new to the job. Behind him, Walt saw Harlan Tibbs from the feed store standing by his own truck, pretending to check his phone. 3 other neighbors lingered by the fence line. Word traveled fast in farm country. "Mr. Brennan," Hendricks didn't offer a handshake. "We received a complaint about your burn permit application." The air smelled like motor oil and cold metal. Walt wiped his hands on a rag, slow and deliberate. "What kind of complaint?" "Anonymous, but detailed." Hendricks flipped pages on his clipboard. "Alleges you're showing signs of cognitive decline. Concerns about your ability to safely manage a 40-acre controlled burn." The words hit like a slap. Walt felt heat rise up his neck despite the January cold. Behind Hendricks, Harlan had stopped pretending to look at his phone. The other neighbors shifted their boots in the gravel. "I've been burning that prairie for 43 years, Walt said quietly. "Never lost control once." "I understand that, sir." Hendricks's voice had that careful tone people use when they think you're fragile. "But given the complaint, I'm required to conduct an evaluation. Standard procedure." Standard procedure. Walt knew what that meant. Questions, tests, humiliation dressed up as safety protocol. "How many acres you planning to burn?" 40, same as always. North pasture. "And you'll be managing this alone? At your age?" 68 wasn't ancient. Walt could still walk 5 miles, fix an engine, calculate yield per acre in his head faster than most men half his age could do it on a calculator. But standing there, with neighbors watching, and this kid with a clipboard looking at him like he was a liability, suddenly 68 felt old. "I've done it alone since my father died in 95. Hendricks wrote something, didn't look up. "We'll need to schedule a formal assessment, cognitive screening, maybe a physical. Make sure you're fit to, I'm fit, to handle fire safely." Hendricks finally met his eyes. "It's for your protection, Mr. Brennan, and your neighbors." The neighbors who were watching this, who would talk about it at the feed store, at church, at the diner. Poor Walt Brennan, getting forgetful. Fire marshal had to check on him. Harlan called out from the fence. "Walt's sharp as ever, Marshal. I sold him seed last week, calculated his whole order in his head. 40 bags winter wheat exact." Hendricks didn't even glance at Harlan. "We'll mail you the details about the assessment. Until then, your permit application is on hold." He walked back to his truck. The amber lights flashed once as he started the engine. Gravel crunched under tires. The neighbors dispersed slowly, quietly, like mourners leaving a funeral. Harlan stayed, walked over, hands shoved in his Carhartt pockets. "That's horse shit, Walt." "Yeah." "You know who filed that complaint?" Walt looked at the house. Kitchen window, Diane's car in the driveway, parked at an angle like she'd been in a hurry. "I got a guess," he said. Gene Fairchild's office smelled like old books and pipe tobacco. He'd retired from law practice 5 years back, but kept the office above the hardware store. Said he liked having somewhere to go that wasn't home. Walt found him there most afternoons tying fishing flies at his grandfather's vise. "Riverbend Holdings, LLC, Gene said, fingers moving precisely through thread and feather. "Registered in Delaware. That's the first red flag. People use Delaware when they don't want to be found." Walt sat across from him, coffee gone cold in his hand. Outside, sleet tapped against the window. I traced the registered agent. Gene set down his fly, a perfect Adams dry fly, size 14. Marcus Caulfield. Name ring a bell? No. Gene turned his laptop around. A website. Caulfield Development Group, corporate headshots, project portfolios, luxury subdivisions, strip malls, industrial parks. And there, in the Featured Projects section, a rendering labeled Riverbend Estates, 380 luxury home sites, coming 2026. Walt's Farm. His North 40, the original homestead, carved into cul-de-sacs and McMansions. There's more. Gene clicked through documents. Option contract, filed with the county recorder last October. Marcus Caulfield has the right to purchase 190 acres from Riverbend Holdings LLC, contingent on clear title transfer by May 15th of this year. Purchase price $4.2 million. The number hung in the air like smoke. That's my land, Walt said. That's your land, Gene agreed. Which means Diane didn't just forge your signature for fun. She's got a buyer, a deadline, and a financial incentive to make you disappear. Disappear. The word settled cold in Walt's chest. Gene pulled up another document. Newspaper archive from 1998. Cedar County farmers lose land and development scheme. Marcus Caulfield's name in the article. 3 families displaced. Lawsuit settled quietly. No charges filed. He's done this before, Gene said. Finds vulnerable landowners. Pressure. Forgery. Occasionally a convenient guardianship petition when the owner won't sell. Walt's coffee cup shook in his hand. He set it down. I need a lawyer. You need a good lawyer, which costs money. Gene leaned back in his chair. How much you got saved? Enough, maybe. Walt? Gene's voice was gentle, too gentle. The bank's not going to loan against your farm if the title's disputed, and you'll need $50,000 minimum to fight this properly. Forgery case, deed challenge, maybe fraud charges if we're lucky. Walt pulled out his checkbook, looked at the balance. $18,000, enough to run the farm through spring, not enough to save it. I can't afford to lose, he said. Then we need to get creative. Gene reached for his pipe. Because if Diane gets that quit claim to stick, Marcus gets his land, she gets her cut, and you get 5 acres and a house you can't afford to heat. Outside, sleet turned to freezing rain. The sound of it on the metal awning was like static, white noise that drowned out thinking. Walt pulled Diane's college yearbook from his coat. He'd found it that morning, hidden in a box in the attic, opened it to the page he'd marked. Marcus Caulfield, football team, bright smile, confident eyes, and in the margin, written in Diane's teenage handwriting, wait for me, a lipstick kiss mark beside it. Gene looked at the photo, then at Walt. When did they reconnect? I don't know, Walt said. But she's been taking property investment classes online for 6 months. That's what she told me. Classes. Gene set down his pipe. Walt, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Okay. How far are you willing to go to keep that land? Walt thought about his grandfather breaking prairie with a mule and a plow. Thought about his father nearly losing it all in the 1980s farm crisis, holding on by his fingernails and faith. Thought about walking fence lines every January with a brass compass, whispering promises to dirt and grass. As far as it takes, he said. Gene nodded once. Then we start fighting dirty, because they already did. The back booth at Riverside Bait and Cafe smelled like fried eggs and old vinyl. Gene spread papers across the sticky laminate table. Documents, timelines, legal statutes printed in small type. Walt's coffee sat untouched, growing a skin. We can't attack the quitclaim directly, Gene said. That's months of litigation, tens of thousands you don't have. By the time it gets to court, Marcus's option expires and he walks away. Diane keeps the forged deed and tries again with someone else. So what do we do? Gene tapped the fire marshal's letter with his pen. We use what she gave us. She filed that anonymous complaint thinking it would shut you down, make you look incompetent. But what she actually did was create a public hearing. Walt looked up. The burn permit appeal. Exactly. Appeals require sworn affidavits, witnesses, testimony under penalty of perjury. Gene leaned forward, voice low. If Diane, or anyone connected to her, submits a statement claiming you're incompetent and we can prove it's false, we've got her on record lying. That opens the door to fraud investigation, maybe even criminal charges. Outside, a truck rolled past on the county road. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Someone dropped coins in the jukebox, old country music, steel guitar, and regret. You're setting a trap, Walt said. I'm giving her rope. Whether she hangs herself is up to her. Jean pulled out a yellow legal pad. But we need documentation, evidence, proof that you're competent, capable, and completely sound of mind. How do we do that? We go to someone who's been watching you for 40 years, someone who keeps records. Jean wrote a name, Ramona Sykes. She's got every document you've ever signed in that office. Deeds, permits, tax forms, notarized affidavits, 40 years of your signature, your handwriting, your capacity. Walt remembered Ramona slipping the quitclaim copy into her folder. I'll keep this safe. You trust her? Jean asked. With my life. Good. Because I need you to call her today. Tell her to pull every document you've signed since 1985, every single one. We're going to build a signature comparison that'll make that forgery look like a crayon drawing. Jean's pen moved across the legal pad. Names, tasks, deadlines. We'll also need character witnesses, Harlan from the feed store, your neighbors, anyone who can testify you're sharp, reliable, trustworthy. Walt thought about the neighbors watching the fire marshal question him. Some had walked away, but Harlan had stayed. Mrs. Lorenz next door had waved from her kitchen window that evening, a small gesture of solidarity. How long do we have? Burn permit appeal hearing is March 15th. That gives us 6 weeks to prepare. Jean looked at him across the table. Can you hold it together that long? Walt's hands were steady on his coffee cup. His voice was steady, too. I've held worse. Jean nodded slowly. Then he asked the question Walt had been dreading. What about Diane? You still living in that house with her? Where else would I go? Jean's wife has a spare room. No. Walt's voice was firm. I leave that house. She'll say I abandoned it. File something legal. Get a lockout order. I'm not giving her the satisfaction. Walt, it's going to get ugly. Living with someone who's actively trying to destroy you. I grew up in the Depression, Jean. My father taught me how to endure. Walt finally took a sip of cold coffee. It tasted like ashes. Besides, maybe she'll slip, say something, do something stupid. I'm more useful to us inside than out. Jean studied him for a long moment. You're tougher than you look, old man. I'm tougher than I feel, Walt corrected. Outside, the first hint of thaw dripped from the diner's eaves. Not spring yet, just winter loosening its grip by degrees. The sound of it was patient, persistent, inevitable. Jean gathered his papers. Call Ramona today. And Walt, don't confront Diane. Don't let her know you're building a case. Smile, nod, let her think she's winning. I've been doing that for 2 years, Walt said quietly. What's 6 more weeks? The letter came on a Tuesday. County Fire Marshal letterhead, official stamp. Walt opened it, standing by the mailbox, cold wind cutting through his canvas jacket. Appeal accepted. Hearing scheduled March 15th, 10 o'clock a.m., County Courthouse, Room 3B. Applicant permitted to present witnesses and documentary evidence regarding competency and fire management capability. He read it twice. His hands didn't shake anymore. Hadn't shaken since Jean laid out the plan. He walked back to the house, envelope in hand. The smell of warming soil was faint but present. February thaw starting, mud season approaching. His boots squelched in soft ground. Inside he called Jean first, then Ramona, then Harlan. I need witnesses, he told each of them. People willing to testify I'm sound of mind. None of them hesitated. Ramona said she'd already started pulling files. 40 years of documents, sorted chronologically. Your signature's been consistent since 1985, she told him, steady hand. Clear mind. That quitclaim looks like a child's forgery compared to your real writing. Harlan said he'd bring his receipt books. You've been doing business with me for 30 years, never missed a calculation, never wrote a bad check. I'll tell them that under oath. Jean said he'd handle the legal filings. We're going to bury them in competence, Walt. They want to claim you're declining? We'll show them 40 years of evidence to the contrary. Walt stood in his kitchen after the calls ended. The compass sat on the table where he'd left it that morning. Brass dull in February's gray light. He picked it up, held it the way his grandfather had taught him, felt its weight, its certainty. For the first time since discovering the forgery, he allowed himself to believe he might win. The feeling lasted exactly 4 hours. That afternoon, Diane came home early. She dropped her purse on the counter, heels clicking across the oak floor. Her face was too calm, too controlled. She slid an envelope across the table toward him. What's this? He asked. Open it. He did. Legal documents, dense text, official stamps. The words jumped out at him like snakes. Petition for emergency guardianship. Respondent Walter James Brennan. Exhibits confusion. Poor judgment, fire-starting obsession, endangering property. His vision blurred, then cleared. "You're filing for guardianship," he said. "I'm trying to protect you." Her voice was soft, reasonable, the voice she used with difficult clients. "You're not thinking clearly, Walt. This obsession with the burn permit, your paranoia about the quitclaim. I've talked to our doctor. You've talked to a doctor, not mine. And he agrees you need evaluation, maybe medication, maybe more." She touched his hand. He pulled away. "I love you, Walt. I'm doing this because I love you." The lie sat between them like a third person at the table. He looked at the hearing date. April 28th, 2 weeks before Marcus Caulfield's option deadline. If she won guardianship, she'd have power of attorney. Could sell the farm, could do whatever she wanted with his name, his land, his life. "You should have just asked for a divorce," Walt said quietly. Diane's mask slipped for half a second. He saw something cold underneath, something hungry. Then she smiled. "This isn't about divorce. It's about keeping you safe." She left the papers on the table, walked upstairs. The bedroom door closed softly. Walt sat alone in the kitchen as afternoon light died. Outside, the thaw continued, steady, relentless, turning ice to water, solid ground to mud. He picked up the phone, dialed Jean's number. "She filed for guardianship," he said when Jean answered. Silence on the other end. Then, "Son of a bitch." Hearing's April 28th. "Jesus, Walt. That's 2 weeks before the option deadline. She's making her move." Walt looked at the guardianship petition, at his wife's signature on the bottom, at the claims of confusion, obsession, danger. "So do we," he said. The petition sat on Walt's nightstand like a rattlesnake. He'd moved it from the kitchen after Diane went to bed. Couldn't stand looking at it during dinner. Now, at 3 a.m, he read it again by lamplight while she slept across the hall. She'd taken the guest room 2 weeks ago, called it "giving you space." The language was clinical, brutal in its precision. Respondent exhibits marked confusion regarding financial matters, evidenced by unfounded accusations of document forgery. Respondent demonstrates obsessive behavior centered on agricultural burning, despite citations from county fire marshal. Respondent's judgment is impaired, creating imminent risk to self, spouse, and surrounding properties valued in excess of $2.8 million. Every word was a blade, designed to cut. The supporting affidavit came from Dr. Raymond Pierce, a psychologist Walt had never met. Pierce claimed Diane had consulted him regarding her husband's concerning behavioral changes. The language was careful, full of words like "allegedly" and "reported symptoms" and "warrants clinical evaluation." It was a professional hit job dressed up as concern. Walt set the papers down. His bedroom smelled like old wood and the faint lavender of sheets Diane had bought years ago, back when she still slept here. The window rattled in its frame, March wind, warmer now but still carrying winter's bite. He thought about calling Jean. It was too early. He thought about sleeping. That was impossible. Instead, he got dressed in the dark and walked out to the barn. The equipment sat in neat rows, his grandfather's tools on the pegboard, organized by size and function. Everything had its place. Everything worked. Walt ran his hand along the workbench his father had built in 1977, feeling the worn spots where 3 generations of hands had gripped wood. The barn smelled like motor oil and hay dust and history. If Diane won guardianship, someone else would stand here. Someone who'd sell these tools at auction, scrap metal by the pound. The thought made his chest tight. He heard gravel crunch outside, saw headlights sweep across the barn wall. Jean's truck pulled up. The old lawyer stepped out carrying a thermos and a manila folder thick with papers. "Couldn't sleep either," Jean said, pouring coffee into 2 metal cups. "Figured you'd be out here." They sat on hay bales, steam rising from their cups in the cold barn air. "She's smart," Jean said, flipping through the guardianship petition. "Filed emergency status. That means if the judge grants temporary guardianship at the hearing, she gets immediate control, pending full evaluation, which could take months. By which time the farm's sold." "By which time the farm's sold," Jean confirmed. He pulled out his own documents. But here's the thing about guardianship cases. They require clear and convincing evidence, not just a doctor's affidavit based on hearsay. Real evidence, medical records, witnesses to incompetence, documented incidents. She's got the fire marshal citation. "We've got your appeal, which includes your witnesses, your documentation." Jean sipped his coffee. And I've got a trick up my sleeve. What kind of trick? Iowa law requires petitioners to be deposed at least 10 days before a guardianship hearing, under oath. That means Diane has to answer my questions about when she first noticed your decline, about why she filed the quitclaim before she filed for guardianship, about her relationship with Marcus Caulfield. Walt looked up. You can ask about Marcus? I can ask about anything relevant to her standing as a concerned spouse, including financial motives. Jean's smile was thin, sharp. She'll have a lawyer telling her what not to answer, but the questions alone will tell the judge there's more going on here than a worried wife. Outside, the wind picked up. The barn door creaked on its hinges. Dawn was still an hour away, but Walt could feel it coming, the way you can feel weather change before it arrives. When's the deposition? April 18th, 10 days before the hearing. Jean drained his cup. Until then, you document everything. Every conversation, every lucid decision, every piece of farm business you conduct successfully. We're building a counter-narrative, Walt. She says you're declining. We say you're being targeted. Walt nodded slowly. What about the burn permit hearing? That's still March 15th. We go. We win. We get that permit approved. It's one more piece of evidence you're competent. One more brick in our wall. Jean stood, joints cracking. But Walt, this is going to get worse before it gets better. She's going to escalate, make public moves, force you into positions where you look unstable if you react. I won't react. You're human. Everyone reacts eventually. Jean put a hand on his shoulder. Just make sure, when you do, it's calculated, not emotional. After Jean left, Walt sat alone in the barn as dawn broke gray and cold. The smell of warming earth was stronger now, mud season, in full force. His boots would be filthy for weeks. He thought about Diane asleep in the guest room, about the careful way she'd orchestrated this, the doctor's affidavit, the emergency petition, the timing designed to corner him right before Marcus's deadline. She wasn't leaving anything to chance. Neither would he. The town hall meeting was scheduled for Thursday, March 10th, 5 days before Walt's burn permit hearing. The agenda, proposed zoning change to allow residential subdivision development on agricultural land. Walt knew what that meant. So did everyone else who showed up. The room smelled like burnt coffee and wet wool, 30 people shaking off March rain, filling metal folding chairs. The township board sat at a table up front, looking uncomfortable. They knew this would get ugly. Marcus Caulfield stood near the door. Tall, expensive suit, silver hair styled like a TV lawyer. Walt recognized him from the website photos. Marcus caught his eye, smiled slightly, a predator's smile. Diane sat 3 rows from the front. She'd dressed carefully. Soft sweater, minimal jewelry, the concerned wife costume. She didn't look at Walt when he entered, didn't acknowledge him at all. The board chair called the meeting to order. Explain the proposal, rezone 200 acres from agricultural to residential, allow subdivision development, anticipated property tax revenue, economic growth, jobs. He didn't mention whose 200 acres, he didn't have to. Public comment opened. Marcus went first. His voice was smooth, practiced. He talked about progress, about bringing young families to the county, about responsible development that honored agricultural heritage while embracing the future. He had charts, renderings, a PowerPoint presentation showing tree-lined streets and tasteful homes. Riverbend Estates will be a jewel for this community, Marcus said, a place where farming history meets modern living. Harlan Tibbs stood up. Whose land? Marcus's smile tightened. The property owner prefers to remain private at this stage. It's Walt Brennan's land, Harlan said loudly. His family's land, since 1924, and I'm guessing Walt doesn't know about these jewel plans. Every head turned toward Walt. He stood slowly, his knees cracked. The room was too warm, too full. He could feel sweat under his collar. I'm not selling, he said. His voice sounded old, thin. That land's my grandfather's homestead. He broke it with a mule. My father nearly lost it in the 80s, but held on. I'm not the one who gives it up to a parking lot. Murmurs rippled through the room. Then Diane stood. Walt, her voice was gentle, pained. You're not thinking clearly about this. The room went silent. That land is both of ours, our future, our retirement. We're not young anymore. She looked at the crowd, not at him. I love my husband, but he's not. He's having trouble seeing reality. His judgment is impaired. That's why I've had to take steps, difficult steps, to protect us both. Someone in the back whispered loud enough to carry. Heard she filed for guardianship. Diane's eyes glistened. Actual tears, or remarkable acting. I didn't want it to be public. But yes, I'm trying to get Walt the help he needs before he makes decisions that destroy everything we've built. Walt felt the room shift, saw faces change, sympathy flowing toward Diane, pity, or worse, discomfort directed at him. He opened his mouth, closed it. Anything he said now would sound defensive, paranoid, exactly what she wanted. Then Mrs. Hedda Lorenz stood up, 81 years old, widow, Walt's neighbor for 30 years. She wore a cardigan that smelled like mothballs and homemade soap. Her voice was quiet but clear. Diane, you've lived on that land 2 years. Mrs. Lorenz looked at her without blinking. Walt's family bled into it for a century. I watch from my kitchen window every day. I see him walk those fields, check equipment, plan crops. His mind is clear, his heart is true. She paused. Shame on you. The words hung in the air like a judgment. Half the room erupted, younger business owners shouting about progress and property rights, older farmers standing with arms crossed, faces hard, the board chair banging his gavel, calling for order. Diane walked out, head high, phone already at her ear. Marcus followed her, but not before catching Walt's eye again. That same predator smile. We're just getting started. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Walt stood in the middle of it, feeling 68 years old and completely alone. Outside, rain hammered the pavement. Mrs. Lorenz offered to drive him home. He declined. Walked to his truck through the downpour, rain soaking through his jacket, turning the parking lot to mud. Half the town thought he was senile. The other half thought he was stubborn. And Diane had just made sure everyone knew about the guardianship petition. He sat in his truck, water dripping from his hair, watching people hurry to their cars, saw clusters forming, people talking, gesturing, choosing sides. His phone buzzed. Text from Jean. That was a trap. She wanted you to look unstable. Don't engage. Stick to the plan. Walt typed back. What plan? I'm losing everything. Jean's response came immediately. Not yet. You're not. Deposition in 8 days. Trust the process. Walt set down his phone, started the truck, drove home through March rain that smelled like thaw and mud and endings. When he got there, Diane's car was gone. The house was dark. He stood in the driveway for a long time, rain running down his neck, looking at the home his grandfather built with rough hands and borrowed money during the Depression. Inside, he'd sleep alone, wake alone, eat breakfast alone, and somehow he'd hold on until April, because the alternative was unthinkable. His grandson showed up on a Saturday morning during spring break. Walt heard the car pull up, a beat-up Honda with a college parking sticker. He was in the kitchen, coffee going cold, staring at papers he couldn't focus on anymore. Tyler knocked, but walked in before Walt could answer. 20 years old, tall like his father, wearing a hoodie and the kind of confidence young people carry when they haven't been broken yet. Grandpa, Tyler dropped his backpack by the door. Mom said you could use some company. Walt's daughter, living 3 states away, worried but distant. She'd called twice since the guardianship petition, her voice tight with concern, and something else. Embarrassment, maybe. Her father's trouble becoming town gossip. You didn't have to drive all this way, Walt said. Yeah, I did. Tyler poured himself coffee without asking, sat down across from Walt. So, Grandma's trying to take the farm? The bluntness was refreshing, no dancing around it, no careful words. She's trying, Walt said. That's messed up. It is. They sat in silence. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the faint diesel smell that never quite left Walt's clothes. Outside, a cardinal called from the fence line, spring asserting itself despite March's lingering cold. Tyler looked around the kitchen, at the old oak table, the cast iron pan hanging where it had hung for 50 years, the brass compass in its box on the mantel. You gonna lose it? Tyler asked. Not if I can help it. What can I do? Walt studied his grandson. The kid had spent summers here as a child, running through fields, learning to fish, but he'd grown distant in high school. College made it worse. Last Christmas, Tyler had barely looked up from his phone. Now he sat here, eyes clear, asking how to help. You can learn something, Walt said finally. Learn what? Walt stood, took the compass from its box. How to read land. They walked the North 40 in morning light. The ground was soft but not muddy. That brief window between thaw and spring rain. Walt's boots left clear prints. Tyler's sneakers were already caked with dirt. Walt showed him how to hold the compass, brass cold at first, then warming in the palm, how to sight the needle, How to walk a straight line by trusting the earth's pull instead of your eyes. Your great-great-grandfather used this to plot the original property lines, Walt said. 1924. Took him 3 days to survey the whole thing. He'd walk, measure by pacing, mark corners with stone cairns. Tyler held the compass carefully. Why not just use GPS? GPS tells you where you are. This tells you where you're going. Walt pointed north. Walk that direction. Count your paces. Tell me when you've gone 100 yards. Tyler walked, looked back twice, stumbled once, but he kept the needle true. Walt watched him go. The kid's stride was different from his own, longer, less economical. Young people walked like they had endless miles ahead. Old men walked like they were measuring what remained. When Tyler returned, his face was different. Focused, present in a way Walt hadn't seen before. That's harder than it looks, Tyler said. Most things worth doing are. Walt took the compass back. Your great-great-grandfather did this in winter, snow up to his knees. He'd camp in that barn, no heat, no electricity, just determination and a belief that land ownership meant something. They walked back toward the house. The smell of warming soil was everywhere now, rich, dark, full of promise. A killdeer called from the creek bottom, defending invisible territory. Why's Grandma doing this? Tyler asked suddenly. Walt chose his words carefully. She sees land different than we do. To her, it's property, something with a price. To us, it's... He paused, searching. It's who we are. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got. At the house, Tyler asked to borrow paper. Spent an hour at the kitchen table writing something by hand. His generation didn't write by hand anymore. Everything was typed, deleted, edited until perfect. But Tyler wrote in longhand, scratching out lines, starting over. When he finished, he folded it carefully. If you need me to say something at the hearing, Tyler said, I will. I'll tell them you're sharp. That you taught me something this morning, I'll remember my whole life. Walt's throat tightened. You don't have to. Yeah, I do. Tyler's voice was firm, adult. This is my family, too. And that land? It's supposed to be mine someday, right? If Grandma takes it, I lose it, too. The kid understood, finally understood. Walt pulled him into a hug. Tyler smelled like cheap cologne in youth and loyalty. When Walt let go, he had to turn away to hide his eyes. Thank you, Walt said quietly. Tyler left Sunday morning. Promised to come back for the hearing if needed. Left the folded letter on the kitchen table with a note. For Jean, if it helps. Walt opened it after Tyler drove away. To whom it may concern, my grandfather taught me to use a surveyor's compass yesterday. His hands were steady, his instructions were clear, his knowledge was deep, his mind is sharp. If you think otherwise, you don't know Walter Brennan. Signed, Tyler James Brennan. Walt folded it carefully, put it with the other documents Jean was assembling. One more piece of evidence, one more voice saying, he's fine. But in the quiet house, with Diane still gone, and the hearing 3 weeks away, Walt wondered if it would be enough. Jean's office smelled like fresh coffee and old leather. He'd cleared his desk of everything except Walt's case. Documents organized in color-coded folders, timeline on the wall, witness list typed and annotated. Diane's deposition is April 18th, Jean said, tapping the calendar. 10 days before the guardianship hearing. Iowa code requires it. She has to answer my questions under oath, with a court reporter recording every word. Walt sat across from him, Tyler's letter in his coat pocket. What are you going to ask her? Everything she doesn't want to answer. Jean pulled out a legal pad covered in notes. When did she first notice your alleged decline? Why did she file the LLC in October if she wasn't concerned about your competence until November? How well does she know Marcus Caulfield? What's her financial interest in the Riverbend development? Her lawyer will object. Her lawyer will object to everything, but the judge will see the pattern. A wife claiming concern while simultaneously positioning herself to profit from her husband's incompetence? Jean shook his head. That's not caregiving. That's opportunism. Ramona arrived at noon, carrying a banker's box. She set it on Jean's desk with a heavy thud. 73 documents, she said. Every notarized signature Walter James Brennan has executed in my office since 1985. Deeds, permits, tax affidavits, loan applications. She pulled out a poster board. I made comparison samples. His signature's been consistent for 40 years. Steady hand, clear loops, consistent spacing. She laid out the forged quitclaim next to 20 legitimate signatures. The difference was obvious. The forged signature's W was too tight. The B in Brennan had wrong pressure. The spacing was compressed, hesitant. Whoever forged this wasn't even good at it, Ramona said. They counted on nobody checking. Jean photographed everything. This is gold, Ramona. A county clerk with 40 years' experience testifying about signature fraud? Judge will listen. I swore an oath to protect the record, Ramona said simply. This violates everything my office stands for. After she left, Jean made calls. Harlan confirmed he'd testify, had receipts going back decades showing Walt's mathematical accuracy. Mrs. Lorenz agreed to take the stand, had journal entries documenting Walt's daily routines, his competence, his reliability. We're building a wall, Jean said. Every brick is a witness. Every document is mortar. By the time we're done, Diane's petition will look like what it is, a land grab dressed up as concern. Walt's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Stop fighting. Take the settlement. 5 acres plus house. Walk away clean. Last offer. D.F. Diane's lawyer probably copied to Marcus. They're nervous, Jean said, reading over Walt's shoulder. That's good. Means they know we've got something. Walt typed back. No. 3 letters. Easiest message he'd sent all month. Jean's phone rang. He listened, face darkening, hung up. That was the county attorney's office, he said slowly. They've opened a criminal investigation. Forgery, fraud, conspiracy to commit theft by deception. He looked at Walt. Your quitclaim complaint just became a felony case. Walt felt something shift in his chest. Not quite hope, but close. Does Diane know? She will. DA's office is sending notification letters today, to her and to Marcus. Jean's smile was thin and sharp. April just got a lot more interesting. Outside, spring rain started. Soft, steady, the kind that feeds soil instead of flooding it. The sound on Jean's office window was like gentle applause. Walt thought about his grandfather breaking prairie in 1924, about his father holding on through the 80s, about Tyler learning the compass yesterday, his young hands steadying as he understood what it meant. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight looked impossible, especially then. The rumors started at church. Walt heard them third hand from Jean's wife, who'd heard them from the prayer chain, which was really just gossip with a theological veneer. Walt threatened Diane with his grandfather's shotgun. That's why she had to file for guardianship. For her own safety. It was a lie. Complete fiction. But it spread like fire through dry grass. Sunday morning, Walt walked into the fellowship hall for coffee hour. The room smelled like weak coffee and store-bought cookies. Conversation died when he entered. People found sudden interest in their styrofoam cups. Martha Henderson was holding court near the coffee urn. 70 years old, voice like a bullhorn, the kind of woman who confused volume with authority. I heard he keeps guns all over the house, she was saying. Loaded. She's afraid to sleep there. Walt stood 10 feet away. She knew he could hear. That was the point. Jean's wife, Carol, set down her coffee cup with a sharp click. That's a lie, Martha, and you know it. I'm just repeating what I heard. Then stop. Carol's voice carried the authority of 40 years teaching school. Spreading falsehoods about a man's mental state while he's fighting for his home? That's not Christian. That's cruelty. Martha's face flushed red. Well, I never... You just did. Carol walked over to Walt, took his arm. Come on, Walt. Let's get coffee somewhere the air's cleaner. Half the room watched them leave. The other half stared at their shoes. Outside, spring sun was warm on the church steps. The smell of fresh mulch from the flower beds mixed with car exhaust from the parking lot. Thank you, Walt said. Don't thank me. Get angry. Carol looked at him hard. Someone's spreading this intentionally, trying to make you look dangerous, unstable. You know who. Walt did know. Diane's lawyer had sent the settlement offer 3 days ago. When Walt refused, this started. Coordinated, precise. Professional character assassination. What do I do? Nothing. Carol's voice was firm. You respond, you look defensive. You stay silent, you look guilty. So you document, you keep living your life, you let the truth speak at the hearing. She squeezed his arm, and you let your friends fight back. By Wednesday, the rumors had evolved. Now Walt had allegedly tried to burn down the house during an episode, had wandered into town in his pajamas, confused, had accused neighbors of stealing equipment that was sitting in his own barn. None of it was true. All of it was believed by people who wanted to believe it. Harlan posted a sign in his feed store window. Lies are still lies, even when whispered in church. We stand with Walt Brennan. Mrs. Lawrence wrote a letter to the county newspaper. The editor printed it on the front page. I've lived next to Walter Brennan for 30 years. I've watched him through my kitchen window nearly every day. He walks his land like a man in love. He tends his equipment like a craftsman. His mind is clear. His character is unimpeachable. Those spreading rumors should examine their own consciences. By Friday, the town had split cleanly in two. Younger business owners, eager for development money, sided with Progress, which meant siding with Diane and Marcus. Older farmers, who understood what land meant, sided with Walt. The feed store became a Walt stronghold. The coffee shop downtown became Diane territory, and Walt, caught in the middle, just kept working. Fixed fence, serviced equipment, walked property lines with his compass every morning at dawn, let them talk. The hearing would speak louder. The deposition took place in a conference room at the courthouse. Fluorescent lights, fake wood table, court reporters' fingers poised over the stenograph machine, the smell of burnt coffee and floor wax. Diane wore navy blue, professional, serious, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She'd dressed like a concerned wife, not a woman trying to steal a farm. Her lawyer, Kenneth Voss, sat beside her, expensive suit, manicured nails, the kind of attorney who charged $400 an hour to say, "Objection." Jean sat across from them, legal pad open, pen ready. Walt sat against the back wall, silent observer. They'd agreed he wouldn't speak unless directly asked. The court reporter swore Diane in. Jean started gently. Background questions, how long married, where they lived, basic establishment of facts. Then, when did you first become concerned about your husband's cognitive decline? Diane glanced at Voss. He nodded slightly. November, she said, last November? He started becoming forgetful, repeating himself, losing track of conversations. Jean wrote something. November of last year, 2024. Yes. And these concerns, did they prompt you to take any action? I consulted a psychologist, Dr. Pierce. He recommended evaluation. When did you consult Dr. Pierce? December? Jean flipped pages. And when did you form Riverbend Holdings LLC? Voss leaned forward. Objection, relevance. Jean didn't look up. The petitioner claims concern for her husband's welfare starting in November. I'm establishing a timeline of her actions during that period. The court reporter's fingers flew. I'll allow it, Voss said reluctantly, but keep it narrow. Diane shifted in her seat. October. I formed the LLC in October. October 2024. 1 month before you noticed your husband's alleged decline. Yes. What was the purpose of this LLC? Investment opportunities? Property development? Jean pulled out a document, slid it across the table. This is the filing for Riverbend Holdings LLC. You're listed as managing member. Marcus Caulfield is listed as treasurer. How do you know Mr. Caulfield? Diane's jaw tightened. We went to college together. Just college? No other relationship? Voss. Objection. Personal relationships are not relevant to guardianship capacity. Jean. They're relevant to the petitioner's motivations for filing. Silence. The air conditioning kicked on with a rattle. Voss. Answer the question. Diane. We dated, briefly, 28 years ago. And you reconnected when? Last year, spring. Jean wrote slowly, letting the timeline sink in. So you reconnected with your college boyfriend in spring 2024, formed an LLC with him as treasurer in October 2024, then in November 2024, you suddenly noticed your husband showing signs of cognitive decline. Do I have that sequence correct? Diane's face flushed. You're twisting things. I'm establishing facts. Did you or did you not file a quitclaim deed transferring 190 acres of your husband's family farm to this LLC in January 2025? Voss. Objection. That document is under investigation. My client asserts she had no knowledge. Your client's signature is on the filing as managing member. Jean interrupted. The county recorder has a copy. So does the DA's office. Diane's eyes widened slightly. What? Jean pulled out another document. This is a notification letter from the county attorney, dated April 12th. It informs you that you're under criminal investigation for forgery, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft by deception. Did you receive this? Voss grabbed the letter. Read it. His face went pale. We need a recess, Voss said. We're in the middle of a deposition. My client needs to consult with me. Now. The court reporter marked the time. 11:47 a.m., Voss and Diane left the room. Walt could hear their voices through the door, Voss sharp and urgent, Diane's rising in pitch. Jean looked at Walt, said nothing, didn't need to, they'd drawn blood. When the deposition resumed 20 minutes later, Diane was composed, but different. The confidence was gone, replaced by something more careful, more afraid. Jean continued, Mrs. Brennan, have you ever used your husband's signature without his knowledge or permission? Voss. Objection. Fifth Amendment. My client declines to answer on grounds of self-incrimination. Jean smiled. Noted for the record. He asked 17 more questions. Diane took the fifth on 12 of them. Every refusal was an admission. Every silence spoke volumes. When it ended, Diane and Voss left quickly. No eye contact with Walt, no parting words. Jean packed his papers slowly, methodically. That, he said, is what winning looks like before you've won. Walt stood at the window, watched Diane get into her car, watched her sit there for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, head bowed. For half a second, he felt something like pity. Then he remembered the forged signature, the guardianship petition, the rumors about shotguns and midnight wandering. The pity evaporated. Outside, April rain started, soft, steady, the sound of it on the courthouse roof like typing, like the court reporter's fingers, like the permanent record being written. The hearing's in 10 days, Jean said. She'll be desperate. Expect something. Walt nodded. I'm ready. But driving home through spring rain that smelled like wet earth and new growth, he wondered if anyone was ever really ready for the moment everything came apart, or came together. 10 days would tell. Diane sat in the guest room of her sister's apartment, staring at the letter from the county attorney. The paper smelled like cheap printer ink and consequences. Outside, traffic hummed on the wet street, anonymous city noise, nothing like the farm's silence. Her phone sat on the nightstand. 3 missed calls from Marcus, 2 from Voss. She'd ignored them all. The bathroom mirror showed someone she barely recognized. 42 years old, going on 60, lines around her mouth that hadn't been there 6 months ago, eyes that looked hunted. She poured whiskey into a hotel-style plastic cup. 10:30 in the morning. When had that started? The reflection didn't answer. She thought about Walt, about the way he'd looked at her during the deposition, not with anger, but with something worse. Disappointment, like she'd confirmed something he'd hoped wasn't true. Her phone buzzed. Marcus again. She answered. Where are you? His voice was tight, controlled, the voice he used when deals were falling apart. My sister's. You can't hide. The hearing's in 9 days. Voss says you're taking the fifth killed our credibility show. Our credibility? Diane laughed. It sounded broken. I'm the one facing fraud charges, Marcus. Where's your name in the DA's letter? Silence. Then, I'm insulated. The LLC structure protects you, not me. She drank. The whiskey burned. I forged his signature. I filed the documents. You just waited for the payout. We're partners in this. No, I'm the criminal. You're the investor. Her voice cracked. I'm going to lose everything. My license, my reputation, maybe my freedom. And you'll find another project, another desperate woman to do your dirty work. Diane. She hung up, turned off the phone. In the mirror, her mother's face looked back. Her mother, who'd stayed in a bad marriage for 30 years because she was too proud to admit she'd chosen wrong. Her mother, who'd died bitter and alone, refusing help until it was too late. Diane picked up her phone, turned it back on, scrolled to her mother's old number. Disconnected now, but still saved. She'd never been able to delete it. She pressed call, let it ring into nothing. Mom, she whispered to the void. I don't know who I am anymore. The void didn't answer. She thought about calling Walt, apologizing, withdrawing the petition, walking away before the hearing destroyed what was left of her. But the option deadline was May 15th. Marcus had the contract. She'd signed personal guarantees. If the deal fell through because she backed out, Marcus would sue her for breach. She'd lose everything anyway. Forward meant fraud charges. Backward meant financial ruin. There was no good choice left. She poured more whiskey, watched rain streak the window, remembered the farm in early morning, the way fog sat in the low fields, the way Walt walked the fence lines like he was reading a language only he understood. She'd thought she was marrying security, a widower with land and stability and the kind of quiet strength that looked like everything her first marriage lacked. But she'd never loved the land, never understood why Walt measured worth in acres instead of dollars, never grasped that to him those fields weren't property, they were identity. And now she was trying to take his identity and subdivide it into half-acre lots with vinyl-sided homes and HOA regulations. Her phone buzzed. Text from Voss. "We need to talk strategy, call me." Another from Marcus. "Stay the course. We're too close to quit now." She looked at both messages, then opened a new text to Walt. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "I'm sorry would be meaningless now. I'll withdraw, the petition would be surrender. I never meant for this would be a lie." She'd meant every calculated step. She typed, "You deserved better than this." Stared at it for 5 minutes, deleted it, unsent. Then she typed to Voss, "I'm not withdrawing, we go to hearing," sent it before she could change her mind, set down the phone, finished the whiskey, lay back on the bed that smelled like generic detergent and other people's lives. She'd crossed the line now. No going back. The only direction left was through, toward the hearing, toward whatever judgment waited on the other side, toward becoming, officially and permanently, the villain in someone else's story. The rain continued, steady, relentless, washing nothing clean. Jean's office was crowded. Walt, Ramona, Harlan, Mrs. Lawrence, and Carol all crammed into the small space that smelled like coffee and old law books. Outside, April evening light slanted through the windows. Golden, warm, the kind of light that promised summer, eventually. Jean stood at his whiteboard, marker in hand. "The hearing is April 28th, 10 a.m. We'll have maybe 2 hours to present our case. Here's the order." He wrote names in neat columns. First witness, Ramona Sykes. You'll testify about the signature forgery. Bring your poster board with the comparison samples. Keep it technical but clear. The judge needs to see the quit claim is fraudulent. Ramona nodded. "I've testified in document cases before. I know what to do." Second witness, Harlan Tibbs. Character testimony, business dealings, mathematical competence. You'll establish that Walt's mind is sharp, his judgment sound. Harlan grunted. "Got my receipt books going back to 1995. Cash register tape doesn't lie." A third witness, Head to Lawrence. Daily observation. You're his neighbor, you see him every day, you'll testify to his routines, his capability, his complete competence. Mrs. Lorenz adjusted her cardigan. "I've been keeping notes, dates, times, what I observe. A journal is admissible, yes?" "It is. Bring it." Jean wrote another name. Fourth, Tyler Brennan. We'll read his letter into the record. Young voice, multi-generational perspective. Shows Walt's capable of teaching complex skills. Walt touched his coat pocket. The folded letter was there, worn soft from handling. Finally, Walt testifies. Brief, calm, answers questions directly, doesn't get emotional, doesn't engage with attacks. Jean looked at him. "Can you do that?" "I can." "Because Voss will try to provoke you. He'll bring up the fire marshal citation, the rumors. He'll imply you're paranoid, obsessive, unstable. You have to stay calm." "I've been staying calm for 5 months," Walt said quietly. "I can stay calm for 2 more hours." Jean set down his marker, picked up an object from his desk, Walt's brass compass. "This," Jean said, "is your final piece of testimony. Not verbal, physical. When you take the stand, I want you to put this on the evidence table, right where the judge can see it." "Why?" "Because symbols matter. This compass is 4 generations old. It measured the land when your grandfather broke it. It's been carried by competent hands for a century. When Voss claims you're incompetent, the judge will look at that compass and remember, a man who carries his grandfather's tools with reverence isn't a man who's lost his mind." Walt took the compass, felt its familiar weight. The brass was dull now, tarnished with age and handling. It needed polishing, but somehow the tarnish felt right. Evidence of use, of purpose, of continuity. "What if we lose?" Mrs. Lorenz asked quietly. The room went silent. Jean exhaled slowly. "If we lose, Diane gets temporary guardianship. She'll have power of attorney. She can sell the farm. We can appeal, but that takes months. By then, Marcus's option expires and he moves on. The land gets sold to someone else eventually. Different buyer, same result." "So we can't lose," Harlan said. "We can't lose," Jean agreed. They rehearsed for 2 hours, Jean playing Voss, asking hostile questions, coaching them on tone, on brevity, on staying focused. Ramona practiced her signature analysis, Harlan practiced his character testimony, Mrs. Lorenz practiced reading from her journal without her voice shaking, Walt practiced staying calm, while Jean accused him of paranoia, of obsession, of declining capacity. It felt like preparing for battle, because it was. When they finished, night had fallen. The office windows showed reflections instead of views, faces tired but determined. 1 week, Jean said. Get rest, stay out of trouble. Don't engage with Diane or her people. Let the hearing speak. They filed out into April darkness. The air smelled like fresh earth and distant rain. Spring was here, full and undeniable. The land was waking up. Walt stood on the sidewalk, compass in his pocket, watching his allies drive away. Ramona, Harlan, Mrs. Lawrence, Carol, Jean, people who believed him, people who'd stand with him. He wasn't alone. That mattered. He drove home through country darkness, headlights cutting tunnels through the night. The farm appeared like something emerging from memory. Solid, real, waiting. Inside the house was empty. Diane hadn't been back since the deposition. Her things were still in the guest room, but the space felt abandoned, already a museum to a failed marriage. Walt made coffee, even though it was late, sat at the kitchen table with the compass in front of him, turned on the lamp his grandmother had bought in 1952. 7 days until the hearing. 7 days until he either kept his grandfather's promise or became the generation that lost everything. He picked up the compass, opened it. The needle swung true north, reliable as sunrise. Some things didn't change. Some things couldn't be taken. He'd remember that when Voss tried to break him. The courtroom smelled like wood polish and old law books. April 28th, 10:07 a.m. Walt sat at the defendant's table, though he was the respondent, not the defendant, a distinction that felt meaningless. Jean beside him. Behind them, the gallery half full. Harlan, Mrs. Lawrence, Carol, Tyler, who'd driven through the night from college. Across the aisle, Diane sat with Voss. She wore gray, soft, forgettable. The costume of a concerned wife. She didn't look at Walt, hadn't looked at him since entering. Judge Patricia Alderman presided, 60-something, gray hair pulled back, reading glasses on a chain. She'd been on the bench 23 years. Jean said she was fair but tough, didn't suffer fools or liars. We'll hear from the petitioner first, Judge Alderman said. Mr. Voss, your witnesses. Voss called Dr. Pierce, the psychologist who'd never met Walt but had written the affidavit supporting guardianship. He testified about Diane's reports of forgetfulness, confusion, obsessive behavior regarding fire management. Jean cross-examined gently, surgically. Dr. Pierce, how many times have you personally examined Mr. Brennan? I haven't examined him directly. How many conversations have you had with him? None. So your entire opinion is based on secondhand reports from Mrs. Brennan? That's standard practice in guardianship evaluations when the subject is uncooperative. Was Mr. Brennan ever asked to cooperate? Ever invited to your office? Pause. Not to my knowledge. So you diagnosed a man you've never met, based solely on the reports of a woman who stands to gain financially from his incapacity, Voss objected. Judge Alderman overruled. Dr. Pierce shifted in his chair. I was operating on the information provided. Jean let that sit, moved on. Voss called the fire marshal next. Hendricks testified about the anonymous complaint, about his inspection, about Walt's age and the scope of the burn permit. Jean's cross was brief. Did Mr. Brennan answer your questions coherently? Yes. Did he demonstrate knowledge of fire management practices? Yes, but did you observe any signs of confusion, disorientation, or cognitive impairment during your inspection? Hendricks paused. Not directly, but the complaint was specific. The anonymous complaint, from a source you couldn't verify. A complaint filed, we've since learned, by or at the behest of Mrs. Brennan. Correct? I don't know who filed it. But it wasn't based on your own observations of Mr. Brennan's capacity. No. Jean sat down. Judge Alderman made notes. Her face revealed nothing. Then it was Jean's turn. Your Honor, I call Ramona Sykes. Ramona walked to the stand like she'd done it 1,000 times, swore her oath, stated her credentials, county clerk, 42 years, keeper of the public record. Jean entered the poster board into evidence. 73 signatures, 4 decades, all legitimate, all consistent. Then he placed the quitclaim deed beside them. Ms. Sykes, in your professional opinion, is this signature authentic? Ramona adjusted her glasses, pointed with a steady finger. No, the formation is wrong. The W has compressed loops. Mr. Brennan's natural W has open flowing loops. The spacing between letters is inconsistent. The pressure is wrong. See how the ink is darker here, lighter there. Mr. Brennan's signatures show consistent pressure because he signs with confidence. This signature shows hesitation. How certain are you? Absolutely certain. This is a forgery. Whoever did it had a sample to copy but didn't understand the biomechanics of his natural hand movement. The courtroom was silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to quiet. Gene introduced the filing timestamp, January 3rd, 2:47 p.m. Then he introduced Walt's doctor's appointment record. January 3rd, 2:30 to 3:45 p.m., blood pressure check, 20 miles from the courthouse. Mr. Brennan couldn't have signed this document, Gene said. He was physically elsewhere, and even if he'd been present, this signature isn't his. Voss tried to discredit Ramona on cross, suggested she was biased, that handwriting analysis wasn't definitive. Ramona stared him down. I've authenticated signatures for 4 decades. I've testified in 12 forgery cases. Every one resulted in conviction. This signature is fraudulent. That's not bias. That's expertise. Voss sat down. Harlan was next, brought his receipt books, showed transactions dating back to 1995. Mr. Tibbs, describe your business relationship with Walter Brennan. I sell him seed, feed, equipment parts. He pays cash or check, never missed a payment, never made a mathematical error. Last week he bought 40 bags of spring wheat seed, calculated his per acre need in his head, came out exactly right when I checked with a calculator. Gene showed receipts, detailed, accurate, decades of competent business dealings. Does Mr. Brennan seem confused to you? Forgetful? Harlan snorted. Sharp as a tack. Sharper than men half his age. Hell, sharper than me, and I'm only 5 years younger. Small laughter rippled through the gallery. Judge Alderman didn't smile, but her eyes shifted toward Walt for a moment. Mrs. Lawrence walked slowly to the stand, leaning on her cane. 81 years old, clear eyes, steady voice. She brought her journal. Gene entered it into evidence. Mrs. Lawrence, you live next to Mr. Brennan? 31 years. My kitchen window looks onto his north pasture. What do you observe? She opened her journal, read entries, dates, times, details. January 1st, Walt walking fence line with compass. 6:15 a.m., January 8th, Walt repairing tractor in barn, methodical, careful. January 23rd, Walt clearing snow from my driveway without being asked. February 14th, Walt delivering firewood to my porch. March 2nd, Walt and grandson walking property, teaching him surveying, on and on, small acts, daily competence, kindness. Does Mr. Brennan seem incompetent to you? Mrs. Lorenz looked directly at Judge Alderman. That man walks his land like a man in love. He tends his equipment like a craftsman. He helps his neighbors without asking for thanks. His mind is clear. His heart is true. Anyone who says otherwise is lying. The courtroom held its breath. Voss didn't cross-examine. What could he ask? She was a widow with a journal and 31 years of observation. Gene stood. Your Honor, I'd like to read a letter into the record. From Tyler Brennan, Mr. Brennan's grandson. He read Tyler's letter. Every word, the compass lesson, the steady hands, the clear instructions, the knowledge passed down. If you think my grandfather is incompetent, you don't know Walter Brennan. When Gene finished, Tyler stood in the gallery. Silent witness, young face, old loyalty. Judge Alderman looked at him, nodded slightly. Finally, Gene called Walt. Walt walked to the stand, swore his oath, sat down. He placed his grandfather's brass compass on the evidence table. The thud of metal on wood echoed. Gene asked simple questions. How long he'd owned the farm, his daily routines, his plans for spring planting. Walt answered calmly. No elaboration, no emotion, just facts. Mr. Brennan, why do you carry that compass? Walt looked at it. My grandfather used it to survey this land in 1924. My father carried it. I carry it. Someday my grandson will carry it. It reminds me that land isn't just property, it's a promise. A promise to whom? To the people who broke it, who held it, who trusted me to keep it whole. Silence. Voss stood for cross-examination, tried to rattle Walt, brought up the fire marshal citation, the rumors, the alleged paranoia about the quitclaim. Walt stayed calm, answered every question directly. Mr. Brennan, isn't it true you've become obsessed with this burn permit? No. I've conducted controlled burns for 43 years. It's routine land management. Isn't it true you've accused your wife of forging documents? I didn't accuse. I reported. The county clerk confirmed it's a forgery. The DA opened an investigation. Those are facts, not accusations. Isn't it true you've become increasingly paranoid? No. One word, firm, final. Voss had nothing left. He sat down. Walt returned to his seat. The compass stayed on the evidence table, brass catching courtroom light. Judge Alderman was about to speak when the courtroom door opened. A man entered, tall, silver hair, expensive suit. Walt recognized him immediately. Marcus Caulfield. He walked to the back row, sat down, crossed his legs, supremely confident. Jean leaned toward Walt, whispered, "What's he doing here?" "I don't know," Judge Alderman noticed. "Sir, this is a closed hearing, family and involved parties only." Marcus stood. "Your Honor, I'm Marcus Caulfield. I have a financial interest in the property in question. I believe that makes me an involved party." Jean was on his feet. "Your Honor, Mr. Caulfield has no standing in this guardianship proceeding. I'm here as a courtesy," Marcus said smoothly, "to clarify certain financial arrangements that may impact the court's decision." Judge Alderman's eyes narrowed. "Approach." Marcus walked forward. Jean joined him at the bench. Voss looked confused, then alarmed. Walt couldn't hear the sidebar conversation, but he saw Judge Alderman's face harden, saw her look at Marcus like he was something stuck to her shoe. She waved them back. "Mr. Caulfield," she said, "are you affiliated with Riverbend Holdings, LLC?" "I have business dealings with the company, yes." "What is your role?" Marcus hesitated, just for a second. "I'm a consultant." Jean pulled out a document. "Your Honor, this is the LLC filing. Mr. Caulfield is listed as treasurer, not consultant. Treasurer." Judge Alderman took the document, read it, looked at Marcus. "Mr. Caulfield, you just misrepresented your role in this entity under oath." "I misspoke." "You lied. In my courtroom." Her voice was cold, precise. "Bailiff, please escort Mr. Caulfield to holding. I'm citing him for contempt, and I'm referring this matter to the county attorney for perjury investigation." Marcus's face went pale. "Your Honor, that's not necessary." "Bailiff, now." The bailiff moved. Marcus tried to protest. The courtroom watched in silence as he was escorted out, his expensive shoes squeaking on the polished floor. The door closed behind him. Judge Alderman turned to Diane. "Mrs. Brennan, am I to understand your business partner just committed perjury in a proceeding regarding your petition?" Diane couldn't speak. Her face had gone white as paper. Voss stood. "Your Honor, my client had no knowledge—" "Sit down, counselor." Judge Alderman removed her glasses, rubbed her eyes. "I've heard enough." She looked at the compass on the evidence table, then at Walt, then at the poster board with 73 signatures. "Petition dismissed. The quitclaim deed is void pending criminal investigation. Mr. Brennan, you retain all rights and capacity. Mrs. Brennan, you and your attorney may leave." The gavel struck once. It was over. Walt stood on the courthouse steps in spring sunlight. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass from the courthouse lawn and exhaust from the parking lot. Behind him, Jean was shaking hands with Ramona, with Harlan, with Mrs. Lorenz. Tyler stood close, one hand on Walt's shoulder. Diane emerged from the courthouse alone. Voss had left through a side entrance, briefcase clutched tight, phone already pressed to his ear. She stood at the top of the steps, looking down at the parking lot like she was measuring the distance. Her heels clicked on concrete as she descended. She didn't look at Walt, didn't look at anyone. Just walked to her car, the BMW she'd bought last year with her real estate commissions, and got in. Walt watched her sit there for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, head bowed. Through the windshield, he could see her shoulders shaking. Then she started the engine and drove away. No goodbye, no apology, just tail lights shrinking into distance, misses. Lorenz stood beside Walt, her cane tapping softly on the steps. "You feel sorry for her?" Walt thought about it. "I feel sorry for who she could have been, not who she chose to be." "That's fair," Mrs. Lorenz said. She patted his arm. "Your grandfather would be proud. Your father, too." Harlan clapped Walt on the back. "First round's on me. Riverside Cafe. Let's celebrate." "I appreciate it," Walt said. "But I need to get home. Got spring planning to finish." Because life didn't stop for courtroom victories. The land didn't care about guardianship petitions or forged signatures. It cared about seeds and soil and the steady work of seasons. Jean walked Walt to his truck. "The DA's moving forward with charges. Diane and Marcus both. Forgery, fraud, conspiracy. Marcus picked up an additional perjury charge today. What'll happen to them? Plea deals, probably. Marcus has money for lawyers. He'll negotiate down. Diane?" Jean shook his head. "She'll lose her real estate license." Might do probation, maybe jail time, depends on whether she cooperates. Walt opened his truck door. The interior smelled like diesel and old coffee and the honest dirt of the farm work. I don't want her in jail. You might not get a choice. Once the DA files charges, I know, but I don't have to enjoy it. Walt climbed into the driver's seat. She made her choices. She'll live with them, that's enough. He drove home through May afternoon. The fields were turning green now. Real green, not the pale, desperate green of early spring. Winter wheat coming up in the North 40, the cover crop he'd planted last fall starting to show. He passed Mrs. Lorenz's house. She waved from her kitchen window. He waved back. Past Harlan's feed store. The sign still in the window. We stand with Walt Brennan. Turned onto his own gravel drive. 380 acres. Whole. Intact. His. The house looked the same. The barn looked the same. But something felt different. Lighter. Like a weight had been lifted from the foundation itself. He parked. Sat for a moment in the truck. The compass was in his pocket. He pulled it out. Opened it. The needle swung true north. Always had. Always would. Tyler pulled up behind him, got out, walked over. What now, Grandpa? Walt smiled. Now we burn the prairie. Permits approved. Weather's right. Time to clear the old growth and let the new come up. Can I help? I'm counting on it. They burned on a Saturday morning in mid-May. Walt and Tyler, just the two of them. The weather was perfect. Light wind from the south. Humidity high enough to keep the fire controlled. Walt showed Tyler how to set the fire break, how to read the wind, how to light the drip torch and walk the line steady. The prairie caught slowly, then faster, flames moving through last year's dead grass, crackling and popping, releasing seeds that needed fire to germinate. The smell was clean, ancient, smoke and burning grass and the promise of renewal. They worked in silence mostly, speaking only when necessary, the kind of quiet that comes from shared purpose. By noon, the 40 acres was black, smoking, cleared. Tyler stood at the edge, watching heat shimmer above scorched earth. Looks dead. Wait 2 weeks, boys, Walt said. You'll see green shoots, native prairie grasses, wildflowers, things that have been waiting underground for this. They drove back to the house, ate sandwiches on the porch, drank cold water from the well. Inside, Walt opened the oak box his grandfather had made, took out the brass compass. It needed polishing. He got the metal polish from under the sink, sat at the kitchen table, started working the tarnish away with a soft cloth. Tyler watched. Can I learn how to do that? Walt handed him the cloth, showed him the gentle circular motion, how to work the brass without scratching it. They polished together, grandfather and grandson. The brass began to shine. When they finished, Walt took the compass to the living room. He'd had a case made, oak with a glass front, small brass plate on the bottom. He'd had it engraved, Brennan carried by John, 1924, Thomas, 1967, Walter, 1982, Tyler, 2025. Some promises are kept in acres. He mounted it on the wall, above the fireplace, where his grandfather's tools had always hung. Tyler stepped back, looked at it, at his name. I don't own the farm yet, he said quietly. You will, when I'm gone, and you'll carry that compass the way we did, and you'll teach your children, and the land will remember. Outside, spring evenings settled soft and gold. A meadowlark called from the fence line. Territory declared, mate found, nest built. The sound was pure, timeless. Walt stood on the porch with his grandson, looked out over fields that had seen 100 springs, would see 100 more. The North 40 was black now, burned clean, but in 2 weeks it would be green. In 2 months it would be alive with compass plant and big blue stem and all the things that knew how to survive fire. Some things had to burn to grow, some things had to break to heal. Tyler's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. College friends, probably. Summer plans, the future pulling at him. But he didn't leave the porch. He stood beside his grandfather, watching light fade, watching the land settle into evening. Thanks for fighting, Tyler said. Walt nodded. Thanks for learning. They stood together as the dusk came on, 2 generations. The space between them filled not with words but with understanding. The compass hung inside, brass gleaming, needle true. The prairie lay black and waiting, and the land, patient, ancient knowing. Ancient knowing held them both.